Type 3 hypersensitivity or immune complex mediated hypersensitivity. Now, so far what we have observed is that type 1, type 2, type 3 as well are all related to humoral response. So we are basically looking at an antibody which is enabling an overt reaction. And in this case also you have the antibodies involved. So this is also primarily humoral based immune reaction. But in this case, the antibody is not associated with a cell. In fact, what is observed is that you have a soluble immune complex that is responsible for type 3 hypersensitivity. So let us look at the learning outcomes of the session. When large immune complexes are not cleared by mononuclear cells, they can give rise to tissue damaging type 3 hypersensitivity. So you must understand that the basic purpose of the immune system is to form immune complex, and that immune complex can then be eliminated through various processes. But in this case, although the immune complex has been formed, it is not being cleared by the mononuclear cells, and therefore the presence of these immune complexes leads to type 3 hypersensitivity. So the type 3 hypersensitivity is mediated by activating the complement system, which in turn can build up an inflammatory response. The reactions can either be localized or that is restricted to a specific tissue or organ, or can be generalized, affecting several systems because it gets into circulation. Serum sickness is a manifestation of immune complex mediated reaction. So, when one looks at the fact that an antigen has entered the body, and these antigens may be recognized by antibodies that are already circulating. So, you would have the antibodies coming and binding. And when it comes and binds, it is possible that a lattice of the antibody antigen complex is formed, thereby making the entire complex a huge complex. Now, when this happens, if this immune complex gets deposited in an area very close to the entry point of the antigen, then the reaction is considered to be localized. It will be only at in that area. However, if this enters the bloodstream, then the immune complex can move on to various places and get deposited. So when one says various places, what does it mean? It means that it could go and adhere itself to walls of the blood vessels. That means basically endothelium. It can go and bind to the synovial membrane of joints. It can bind to the glomerular basement membrane of kidneys. It can bind to the choroid plexus of the brain. And since it gets deposited, wherever it gets deposited, it basically recruits neutrophils. And these neutrophils release lytic enzymes, leading to tissue damage. So that is how the type 3 hypersensitivity is built up. Now let us look at the localized type 3 reaction, and this is also called as a localized Arthus reaction. So suppose you consider that an antigen is being injected intradermally. So the antigen, when it enters the dermis, it is able to be bound to by C3b. C3b is a complement factor, and because the C3b binds to this entire immune complex, you would have the formation, or you have what is called as opsonization. So we effectively are understanding that these antigens can be bound to by the antibodies to form immune complex. They are large immune complexes, and they can in turn be bound to by C3b. So there is opsonin formation. Now, also what has been observed is that because of this, you have the complement getting activated, and when C3b is formed, then its counterpart C3a is also formed. Similarly, you can have other anaphylatoxins like C4a, C5a also being formed, and these are going to trigger the degranulation of mast cells. So when the mast cells get degranulated, they release the primary mediators, and of which one of them is histamine. So when histamine binds to the histamine receptor, you have a very typical inflammatory response being formed, leading to vasodilation. And this vasodilation, which enhances the permeability of the blood vessels, leads to erythema, that is redness, and edema, that is swelling. Also, as part of the inflammatory response, you have the neutrophils from the blood vessel getting migrated into the tissue space. So that is what is understood by extravasation. And then these neutrophils are further attracted towards the site where the antigen had entered, or the site where the immune complex has been deposited. Now, because the complex is very large, the neutrophils will not be able to phagocytose it. And so, because of the presence of the C3b, the C3b can bind to the complement receptor present on the surface of the neutrophil, and that will trigger the neutrophil to release lytic enzymes. So degranulation of the neutrophil leads to lytic enzymes being formed, and these lytic enzymes can in turn damage surrounding tissues. What can also be seen because of complement activation is that there where the immune complex has actually gone and adhered to, those cells can also be through the complement pathway. You can have membrane attack complex formed on those tissues, and the tissues can get damaged. So you have a two-pronged damage of tissues. One is through the neutrophils releasing the lytic enzymes, and second, the activation of the complement system. Then, if you have the immune reaction becoming systemic or generalized, then what is observed is one of the most common type 3 hypersensitivity related to systemic system is serum sickness. Now, when does this generally happen? So, for example, suppose a person is being injected with a foreign serum, and this foreign serum, say, contains antitoxins like antitetanus, antidiphtheria. Then these antibodies, that is anti-tetanus and anti-diphtheria, have been formed in another organism. So if in a human, horse anti-tetanus or horse anti-diphtheria is added, then it has a certain level of antigenicity because it has been produced in the horse, and so this can elicit production of the antibodies, and the antibodies can bind to these toxins, can bind to these antibodies. So this antitoxin is acting as a antigen, and the antibodies that is formed by our body is going to bind to these antitoxins, forming an immune complex. And this immune complex can move around in the circulation and then deposit at various places. So within a few days, what is observed is inflammatory response, which is called as the serum sickness. Serum sickness because it came from a foreign serum. So the symptoms of serum sickness include fever, weakness, vasculitis, that is rashes can be formed, edema, erythema. It can be found, or it can lead to what is called as lymphadenopathy. It can lead to arthritis. It can also lead to kidney damage, and that is glomerulonephritis. So all these are manifestations of serum sickness. Such soluble immune complexes can be circulating also in certain autoimmune diseases. Drug reactions can also lead to, so the antibodies can bind to the drugs and form an insoluble complex, and so you can have a similar reaction. Or you can have infectious diseases like meningitis, hepatitis, malaria, these being responsible for forming the soluble immune complexes. So let us make the conclusions. Immune complexes that form large complexes are responsible for type 3 hypersensitivity. The reaction can either be localized or they can be systemic, with the latter, that is the systemic, giving rise to several detrimental conditions such as glomerulonephritis. Kidney failure is definitely a very serious damage. The immune complexes are bound to by complement, which activate complement pathway as well as recruit neutrophils to the site, leading to an inflammatory response. And this inflammatory response is definitely a heightened inflammatory response. Arthur's reaction, serum sickness, autoimmune diseases, drug reactions are examples of type 3 hypersensitivity. So within days of injection, inhalation, or ingestion of certain antigens, when the immune reaction damages tissues on recruitment of neutrophils and complement activation, it is a manifestation of type 3 hypersensitivity. Thank you.